Hello, everybody. Welcome to Going Viral. Today is the 7th of August, 2024, and we're in the middle of conflicts around the world and competition between the Republicans and Democrats setting up to plunder all our votes and get elected. So I want to start. Let me announce who's here. Alex Stavropoulos, who's in New York, and Al Nofi. Where are you, Al?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. And this is it John De Palma?
No, it's Jack.
Jack De Palma.
Jack
you're in
DePalma.
Manhattan, right?
No, I'm Brooklyn as well.
Brooklyn. Okay.
Brooklyn.
And Jim Dingman is no, Jim's in the Upper East Side, right, Jim?
Bronx.
You're back in the Bronx. Okay.
I'm riding on the other side waiting for the bus.
Okay, and I'm Ken Aaron, and I'm trying to convert into becoming not a Republican or a Democrat, but a bi-coastal. I'm from New York, live in Los Angeles, but now I'm back in New York, and right now I'm in New Jersey in a little town called Wantagh. And that's enough personal information. I assume you all recognize us and know each other. We're real human beings. So we're going to start tonight, and Alex Stavropoulos is going to present
Far right-wing riots against migrants in the UK. They'll also talk about, things like the role of social media. It's quite a nice piece they did. So let me start that now.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Thousands of police officers are on high alert in the UK after rioting in cities and towns in England and in Belfast. The violence has been blamed by Prime Minister Keir Starmer on far-right activists and groups organizing themselves online. Individuals, rather than organizations, seem to have been driving the protests, almost all focused around migrants. Mosques have also been targeted. Migration has been a leading topic in politics and media in the UK for several decades, with some newspapers and politicians carving out a hardline stance. The last Conservative government had planned to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda, a plan dropped by the new Labour one. So why has there been such a widespread and sudden upsurge in violence? And how have politics and media affected attitudes on migration? We'll be discussing this with our guests shortly, but first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Riots by far-right protesters have spread across the UK, sparked by a series of murders in a seaside town in the northwest of England. 3 girls aged 6, 7 and 9 were stabbed to death in a knife attack at a children's dance class in Southport. Police arrested a 17-year-old boy who was born in Britain. But users on social media falsely claimed he was a Muslim asylum seeker. Newly elected Reform MP Nigel Farage was criticised for speculating whether, in his words, the truth was being withheld by authorities. A mosque in Southport was attacked by a far-right mob.
Local communities are being thrown apart, and these people from outside are coming and literally destroying the mosque. And we've spoken to the imam from Southport. He said he had to barrage and lock himself inside the office with his other members who were in the mosque at the time. They were afraid the door was going to be broken down.
In the days that followed, the riots spread. In Hartlepool, in the northeast of England, a police car was set alight. And in London, crowds pelted the gates of Downing Street and fought with police officers. That prompted the Prime Minister to hold an emergency meeting with police chiefs.
As far as the far right is concerned, this is coordinated. This is deliberate. This is not a protest that has gone out of hand. It is a group of individuals who are absolutely bent on violence.
But despite government warnings, disorder has persisted. In Nottingham, officers were confronted by far-right protesters. In Hull, a crowd demonstrated outside a hotel housing migrants, and disorder broke out in Belfast. Campaigners opposing racism were also out on the streets, saying those spreading hate and misinformation must be stopped.
We fought them in the 30s, we fought them in the 50s, we fought them in the 70s in Britain. We will not allow the right wing to dominate our working class community. And we will come together every week in every town and bring the message of solidarity to all the people that have come to our community.
Only a month after being elected, the new Labour government is facing a national crisis. and the Prime Minister and Home Secretary are having to focus on stopping violence across the streets of the United Kingdom. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Earn points on rent at any home with Bill. Get rewarded every month on rent, travel, and other expenses around your neighborhood. Redeem points on airlines.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. Joining us from London is Shabna Begum, Chief Executive Officer of the Runnymede Trust, a British race equality and civil rights think tank. In Oxford, Katie Brown is a postdoctoral fellow at Maynooth University in Ireland. She focuses her research on mainstream far-right discourse. Also in London, Sohan D'Souza is a computational social scientist interested in the links between disinformation and political extremism. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Shabna, let me start with you today. All of these riots, all of this violence, this has all erupted so quickly. Why has there been such a widespread and relatively sudden upsurge in violence?
Well, I think, as you say, it has been an outbreak of violence, but I think it's unsurprising given the long lineage of anti-immigrant, Islamophobic demonization that we've seen in our mainstream politics now for years, but particularly intensifying in the last few weeks and months since October 7th with Gaza and what's been happening there, and then with the general election campaign, both during and afterwards. The kind of narratives that we saw being espoused by our mainstream political parties, the trading in insults around Muslim community has become quite normalized by our mainstream political parties. And so it's unsurprising when you see such a hostile environment created by our politicians that then erupts on our streets in the way it has done over the last few days.
Katie, I saw you reacting quite a bit to what Shabna was saying there. It looked like you wanted to jump in, so please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think I'd just echo what Shabna was saying, really. We've witnessed with the election campaign and actually long predating that with Brexit as well, the normalization of anti-immigration discourses, not just from the far right, but from those at the heart of the mainstream within the Tory party and the Labour Party as well. At these protests, there's been signs that say "stop the boats," and that's a direct quote from the previous Conservative government. And then you've got Labour coming in. Now, they did scrap the Rwanda policy, as you mentioned, but they did that often kind of claiming that it was because the policy was ineffective. They weren't challenging the premise of it or the principle of it. And Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said that the security of Britain's borders is her top priority as well. So we've seen a continuation of this violent rhetoric from the mainstream, and that's played a key role in emboldening these actors and creating the atmosphere that we're seeing in Britain at the moment.
Shabna, let me ask you to pick up on a point you were making, and also a point that Katie was making just now. When it comes to this rhetoric that is demonizing of migrants and migration, when you hear top-tier politicians in the UK saying, "stop the boats," or talking about invasions going on at the border, first of all, how different is that from what you were hearing from politicians just a decade ago? The fact that this is all being normalized, but also how much does that impact this kind of anti-migration sentiment throughout society?
Yeah, I think you're right to say that there has been a marked shift in our discourse, and that we have seen since in the last 14 years with the previous government a real escalation of that kind of hostile narrative, particularly kind of as it was created through the hostile environment policies. So we've seen a real activation and an escalation of some of those narratives, and that legitimizes that kind of demonization of migrants. But I think it's really important that we also note that it's not the violence that we've seen in the last few days hasn't been just directed toward migrants. It has been directed towards settled Muslim communities. And so it's mosques that have been targeted, people of color, black and brown, who've been targeted by this violence. So, it's really important that we don't just kind of locate it as part of this anti-immigrant narrative. The anti-immigrant narrative has always been racialized, and we've seen that kind of spill out into the violence and the way that violence has targeted not just migrant communities, not just people seeking asylum in this country, but settled Muslim communities and black people from some of the videos that we've seen circulated on social media. So this is a highly racialized and acts of racist rioting that we're seeing on our streets.
Sohan, to kind of continue with the theme that Shabna was talking about there, misinformation around all this first spread online that the suspect in the murder of these girls was a Muslim immigrant. Then far-right groups falsely claimed the suspect was an asylum seeker. How much of a role has social media played in driving all of this, in fueling these riots, in having an impact when it comes to the violence that we're seeing?
Thank you for having me. It has played a huge role, I think. You can see it from the very beginning when these Potemkin news sites that basically do nothing but put out unverified or mostly unverified information, spread the fake name of this alleged asylum seeker person. And that began spreading around and basically directing what had already been building up for months in terms of anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant propaganda towards a specific event. Focusing people's furies onto that. That the incentives now are probably worse than ever because of the monetization and the combination of the monetization and the opacity surrounding monetization and surrounding identities and being able to track what's behind what. There are many accounts that are behind this, that are spreading misinformation around this that were supposedly created a long time ago and then just scrubbed and renamed, and they've been spreading more misinformation around this and that sort of thing.
Katie, let me ask you, what was the scale, from your vantage point, of the misinformation online? And from your vantage point also, how much has social media driven anti-immigrant sentiment, or fueled these demonstrations thus far?
Well, I think clearly it has played a role. It offers a space for the spreading of disinformation at great levels. It also gives an organizing space for these groups as well. So social media is important, but I think that there's a danger also in overemphasizing the role of social media in this and detracting attention away from some of the issues that Shabna was raising around the role of politicians, political parties, traditional media as well. They've all played a role in creating this political atmosphere. So I think, yes, we can talk about the role of social media, but I think that we need to look at this in a more rounded fashion, and the kinds of narratives that are being put forward by those who we see on television screens, in the newspapers, and the way that they're talking about these issues as well.
Well, Katie, let me ask you more about that. I mean, how much has the way that migration is discussed in media outlets throughout the government, how much has that changed in recent years?
Well, I mean, again, it's kind of touching on similar points to what Shabna was saying. There has been this escalation around it. And we've seen in the case here, for instance, when they were talking about the perpetrator of the attack, the BBC referred to him as born in Wales to Rwandan parents. Now, what's the purpose of referring to his lineage other than to feed into this kind of othering narrative as well? So we do need to look at the traditional media and political parties, our government as well, and their role.
Shabna, I saw you reacting just now to what Katie was saying. It looked like you wanted to add to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're often led to believe this idea that it's a bottom-up process, that politicians are reacting to kind of legitimate grievances and kind of this idea of populist concerns that are arising naturally and organically. But actually, what we do know is that, exactly as Katie just described, the traditional media, our mainstream politicians, are actively responsible for crafting and mediating the messaging on this. And where they have been on this particular incident, but more broadly, how they have talked about immigration, how they have talked about Muslims, has created the perfect fertile ecosystem for all of this violence to occur. So when politicians turn around and talk about being surprised and shocked at the violence, and incidentally, but really importantly, not being able to call it out for being racist rioting in any terms that I've seen so far, when they're expressing their sadness and their regrets and their tough action through policing on these issues, what they need to be aware of is their role, their responsibility, and their culpability in creating that perfect environment for this violence. And we're talking about levels of violence that we haven't seen on our streets in decades, the kind of violence that my parents would have been exposed to back in the 1960s and the 1970s, but which is now being played out on streets, towns, cities across the UK. And that can't just be put down to misinformation in online spaces. We're talking about the politics that's coming out of the UK Parliament and which is being reported in our traditional and established media.
So, Han, I know that.
Okay, so I think we can, the rest of it is pretty good, but I think we can stop there. So they covered social media, but also, of course, the connection with modern, or I should say, mainstream political parties and regular media in all of this. But anyone want to jump in on what they were saying? And and on the
please raise your hand. If nobody else goes, I'll go. Let me raise my hand. Where is it? Oh, there it is.
Oh, we're hearing you, Ken.
Raise hand. There we go. I raise my hand. Anybody else right now? I've been busy doing other things. I mean, I was aware of this, but they didn't seem to put too much emphasis on what started this. Like in the US, we had George Floyd, an unjust execution by a police officer. And it started a summer of riots, a lot of destruction, a lot of people killed. What happened here in the UK was the child of two immigrants, I forget from which country, on random went into a school or something and stabbed a lot of people, but he killed 3 young girls. Again, an unjust execution for no reason, not a police action, just, I guess, a hate crime. I don't even know what happened to him, if he's in custody or they killed him. But the point is, I think this whole riot thing might have been promoted by the fact that the prime minister saying, you've got to back off, don't start attacking Muslims because they're Muslims, because this kid was a Muslim or an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. He made a big point in protecting the immigrants. I don't think he addressed enough to the situation of the immigrants, probably minimal attacks, but the population is sensitive to that, just like they were sensitive not to the death of George Floyd, but by the death of George Floyd by a policeman. In this case, it's the death of 3 girls by the son of an immigrant. And I don't think that the prime minister or the authorities addressed it adequately to show respect for the people that are upset about it, rightfully or wrongfully. He instead said, if you're upset by this, I don't care. I'm going to go after you if you do anything to the class of people that you're upset with. So That's all. I just wanted to make that statement, but I really didn't hear all of the panelists because I, kind of monitoring the meeting here. So I'm done talking. Thank you.
It looks like
The next
Jack
person who's
wants
got
to.
their hand up. The
Jack.
next person's got their hand up is Jack De Palma.
Yeah. Thank you. I've heard about this story, but I didn't know what you just said, Ken, which is probably makes a little bit more sense. Some person did a horrible thing and then they're reacting to it by rioting. The question I have is how extensive? I heard the rioting was extensive. Is this true? I mean, is it like somebody lit a match and now all of a sudden there's wildfires all over England? I mean, I think is it like in 20, 30 different locations. I'd be interested to know how extensive.
Isn't it, don't you consider it being harmonic to the BLM protests and riots?
Oh, no. There's always going to be people that are going to react to.
No, I mean, it was all over the country.
No, the Black Lives Matter was all over the country, but for good reason. They put a video on the television. Everybody saw it, and we were all sitting home watching television. This is a little different. This is from what I gather, from what I just heard from Al Jazeera, I guess. Some politician, Nigel Farage, right? Is that the name?
Yeah.
He's running around saying, "Go burn their houses down, please. Let's get rid of them. We don't need them." And unfortunately, he's in descendant right now, and I believe part of the problem is that England is also in descendant, and they want to look for a scapegoat. So my question is, how extensive is it? Hey, here you go.
Yeah, I just put it. Yeah, this is from Repar, actually, the Russian Telegram channel. But again, this shows. Yeah, you can see again. It's happening in Northern Ireland too. It's not, but you can see that's obviously pretty extensive.
I heard it was
all over.
Belfast, right?
Yeah. So this is, I think, just yesterday, August 6th. Different.
And one other thing, Alex, just to point out, I believe that there's a hooliganism, violence prone.
Yeah.
Like you got football teams and you got football fanatics, I guess they call them.
Ultras is the word
Ultras?
here in Europe.
Yeah. Again, if you don't know the culture and you don't know how to drink the beer with them, you sometimes don't understand what's going on.
Hey, does anybody else want to jump in? Al, Steve, Joan, or Jim, or Julian? I see we have.
The extent of this is just a sign of this deep resentment of immigrants, and like BLM was just indication of a huge mass of people very upset. And that's, of course, really blatant. But you still get people here in the US who say BLM is at fault and not the cops that murdered Floyd. And we got the same people here.
Al, they're saying it now about the governor of Massachusetts of what was it, Minnesota, because he didn't react with the army within a day. They had to crush those protesters.
Somebody has just posted a tape of Trump, maybe he was president then, congratulating Waltz for how well he handled the riots. So that's going to, that may not cool off the wackos because they, I mean, if they decide that the sun doesn't rise in the east, they're going to insist the sun doesn't rise in the east, whether or not it does.
Is anybody there? This is Ken speaking again. Is anybody in this panel aware of the history of criminal acts by immigrants in England? Is this, or just these three girls, and it's a rare occurrence? I remember there was a big to-do about Pakistanis grooming teenage girls into sex slavery about 5 years ago. And I know that there was like a soldier or a guard to the Queen who was attacked, and they cut his head off right during the day. And I can't say they were illegal immigrants or refugees, but there was certainly an Islamic fanatic. So there may be a history there that this was just, the straw over the camel's back, or just the water, adding a little more water to the cup, and then it started to overflow. In other words, I don't think it's fair to say that there's no motivation behind it. And of course, people are flaming it up. But if it happened, but take the viewpoint of, just take the viewpoint for a second, that you as an individual, somebody went in and some random person went in and choked, stabbed, beheaded, whatever, your three nieces, you know, not even directly in your family. So you can understand where there's going to be some human emotion and reaction to, you know, random crimes. But I'm just saying that that's a thing that has to be addressed. You can't just say, now I don't want any retribution, because you have to be super civilized and don't get upset about this, you know.
But
you just can't scold people like that.
just to hear in the U.S., well, was it some Republicans have actually set up a thing where they specifically list crimes by immigrants. Don't tell us what percent of the crimes are being committed by immigrants compared to the rest of the crimes.
Just
Well,
always less. Yeah.
It's the per capita crimes, not the number of crimes.
But they're focusing on the fact that an immigrant committed the crime.
Yeah, but if it's 1 out of every 100.
Oh, no. The point I was making, Ken, is that, you know, when you look at,
is that Alex?
They commit, immigrants in general commit less crimes than their percentage of the population. You know, yeah, it goes to the same thing. You know, yeah, there's that other group that emphasizes, you know, black on white crime, even though, you know, we know most crime is generally done within the same race. You know. But Jack, I see, wants to say something.
Yeah, just to point out that from what Ken had asked, I didn't really kind of cognate on it. George Floyd is a resident of the place where the police basically murdered him for passing a $20 bill, and they did so in a visual way, and they did so over 10 minutes, and they did so, unfortunately for them, because it was in front of a camera in a quite bold way. These types of vigilantes, these types of hooligans, I don't even know what to call them, because obviously they have something to be angry about, but what are they resolving by being angry by, you know, kicking police vans or, you know, burning cars or whatever? And in many places either, it strikes me that they're a mob looking for an excuse to. Now, again, I don't want to make light of the fact that people do horrible things every day. There was just a story about a mentally ill woman that pushed 2 Mexican tourists onto the subway tracks in New York City. So in a place where there's 5 million people and they're coming and going all the time, and there's dangerous things like subway trains and cars, sometimes people do all sorts of, you know, evil, or I don't want to call it evil. I don't know what to call it. There are mean-spirited, nasty, angry people, and sometimes they get together in groups. And isn't there again, you guys know more about this than I do. I'm not the political scientist, but isn't there a certain amount of allowance when you're in a mob to, like, you know, hang them or, you know, burn them or beat them over the head, you know, pummel them with your fists, or, you know, stomp them when they're on the ground because nobody's there? And to see it or to remember it just brings up the idea that we're living in a more violent world than we ever lived in. And even though I think about, you know, other examples of violence, Mussolini, Hitler, or even Native American or African American in America have suffered the consequences of violence that's unrestricted, whether it be by civilians or government or authority. It's just it's the way it is. I bring to mind, Alex, the police allowed the steel workers to riot against the Vietnam veterans against the war at the behest of Ronald Reagan, at the behest of Richard Nixon. What was his name? I forget his name right now. But May 7th, 1970, I observed personally the Hard Hat Riot, which to me was so unusual because I never expected to see people getting hit over the head with 2x4s or, you know, cinder blocks. And it was like, oh my God, is this what? And I wasn't against the war, but I wasn't for, you know, soldiers getting beat up if they talked against the war. So violence is a powerful tool. It depends upon.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Thanks. So let's see who else we got. I don't Jim told me he was on the bus or something, but I'd always like to get a stabilizing comment from Jim. Are you available, Jim? No, I guess not. He's probably, oh, here we go.
I'll unmute. Well, first of all, remember that violence directed against immigrant groups is American is apple pie. We can go back to Irish coming in the period before the Civil War, Italian Americans getting lynched in New Orleans, and stereotypes being placed on Mexicans and all ethnic groups. Jews, of course, were considered criminals too. And so what's interesting about listening to that reportage is it's not talking about what causes this in England. There's been these, this pattern has been going on ever since the 1940s, after when the empire broke up and people were deciding to come as members of the Commonwealth to England. And so you had large amounts of non-white populations from all over the empire coming in, settling in England. And so there was this xenophobic response going back into the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, hacking, bashing, all that kind of stuff. So no one's going to defend a bunch of kids going in and killing some innocent people in a high school. I mean, that's an awful event. But, the situation that I find sort of reminiscent of what we're going through here in this society is, okay, we can blame social media, we can blame misinformation, we can blame this, we can blame that. But what's the causality? Why do people, what's causing this social tendencies to do these things? And look at this election we're going through. We have this 180 million Americans who think that Trump is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they buy into this, very traditional specter of invasion of aliens into the society. And so once you trump that up politically for your own purposes, and the evil other is this person coming in to take your job away, to rob you and steal you. And of course, no one's going to defend. Anybody who defends somebody who is an immigrant. I mean, I remember years ago, I interviewed the battalion commander who I believe Netflix did a film about. The guy commanded the infantry battalion in Dachau. His grandson was killed by a Mexican-American gang in Denver, Colorado. And what did he do? He took the high ground on that. He had a terrible tragedy happen to him. His grandson was killed. But as a judge, he'd been a judge in the state of Colorado, and he got involved in anti-gang de-escalation stuff as a result of that. And, look at Trump. Trump sits there and makes, big hay out of these, terrible incidents. Who's going to defend somebody raping and killing some innocent person? Nobody. But to then say that this is reflective of all the millions of people that have been led into the country due to circumstances beyond their control. They're not responsible for global climate change screwing up their economies. They're not responsible for global inequalities making their life more miserable. They're not responsible for governments that are in power that they have to rebel against, and they decide to flee as political refugees. And this is just going on all around the world. And so, what you're talking about in England, remember, we've had the same kind of phenomena in all these elections in Europe in the past couple of months, in Germany, in France, same kind of reactions to immigrants. So I think it's, what's causing it socially and politically and culturally? That to me is not answered in listening to this rather stereotypical analysis of why people are doing this. Yeah, social media is important, but what's beyond that? Anyway, that's all, let me just mute because I'm in the bus and it's a lot of noise.
Anybody has a closing comment? Because Alex has another topic to bring up. Al, did you want to make something else, another comment?
I've always been there. The wacko, the total wackos, not just in societal relations, but the flat earthers and all the conspiracy theories. They've always been there. What social media has done is make it easier for them to be in touch with each other, and because you have things like YouTube and TikTok and whatnot, you can promote your wacko ideas and get into contact with other people who believe it. And when someone who may be perfectly innocent of anything is looking to find information, it's very easy to go and find the wrong information. I forget what it was. There was a topic. Somebody said if you looked it up on on the internet, I think it was something about Jew. If you entered the word Jew as a search, term, you get the first thing you would get would be a bunch of anti-Semitic sites.
Hate them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Al. And Jack.
Yeah.
Jack.
Just one. When Jim was talking,
And make it quick, please.
1822, I think it was, Jim. It's called the John Street Riot. A black preacher was brought into a Presbyterian church south of Fulton Street in Manhattan in 1822. They literally burned their houses down and dragged them out of the church and beat them in the street. I mean, come on, this is as real as what's ever gone on ever. And I don't think the idea of maybe alcohol has more to do with it than social media. I don't want to, again.
Okay, I agree with Jack. You can, even the Mormons raided a city once and killed people wholesale without any motivation. So, and most societies have done some kind of a thing like the Hutus and the Tutsis, and in Africa, or even during war or not during war. Yes, just it's people. It's not politics. It's the nature of human beings. It's not. You can't really say that there's. Some systems are better than others. I'm not saying everything's equal, but it's mostly, I think, don't blame a philosophy for the misbehavior of human beings. They always have and they always will. Cheat, lie, steal, be jealous and sloth and angry and, justified in all they do. It's human nature. And I don't think you can ever command it to be gone. You can put up barriers and rewards and penalties, and you can try to coax people to behave, and we've done a pretty good job of that in our civilization. After all, I haven't smashed anybody's head in quite a while. So you can be civilized. So let's go back to Alex, who's going to bring us to a new topic.
Okay.
Go for it, Alex.
Which is yeah. So the last week, of course, we had essentially almost like a revolution in Bangladesh with the long-serving, I think it's been ruling for almost 20 years, prime minister, who's basically the daughter of the founder of the country of Bangladesh, who led a resistance to the Pakistanis, along with the Indians, helped them to gain their independence. But she was been fled into exile. Huge crowds stormed her residence, and now today we have a new government that's interim government put in power by the army. So we'll have a piece from BBC on that. Let me share. Okay.
Let's take it to Bangladesh now. The Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus is going to return there, we understand, on Thursday to become the leader of the nation's interim government. He's a long-time political foe of the ousted prime minister. And actually, in the last few minutes or so, we've just got these pictures in from Charles de Gaulle. This is the main airport in Paris. He has been there, we understand, having a minor medical procedure, but he's there, obviously, to fly back to Bangladesh. He was announced as leader following talks between the president and student leaders who played a key role in weeks of protest that toppled Sheikh Hasina. Mr. Yunus is 84. He's faced several legal cases this year, which he said were politically motivated, as I mentioned, in Paris for that small medical procedure. Dhaka is now said to be largely calm, but there have been reports of looting and killing across the country. Police there have also gone on strike. They're complaining of a wave of reprisal attacks against them. Let's take you to Akbar Hussain from our Bengali service, joining us from Dhaka. Where to start? There's so much, but let's start with Mr. Yunus and whether there is broad happiness about the fact that he is coming back and taking over?
He's coming back to Dhaka either tonight or tomorrow, and when he will be back, then Mr. Yunus will choose his colleagues, around 10 or 15 members of the cabinet. And Mr. Yunus came because the students' leaders, they demanded and they proposed the name of Professor Muhammad Yunus as the head of the next interim government, because they think that Mr. Yunus is the person who could turn around the country, because Bangladesh is now, stability is very much needed here. There is no government for the last 2 days. So in many parts of the country, some sort of disorder and violence is still going on. We have seen that many police stations were set on fire, around 500, and police officers, they went under hiding, and all local police stations are empty. So some sort of disorder is still going on, and houses, properties, and businesses belong to the people who were Sheikh Hasina's party, Awami League. Their houses and businesses are burned. So it would be a difficult task for the next interim government to look after these things.
Akbar, you mentioned the police have gone on strike. They're very worried about reprisal attacks. What does that mean for the streets of Dhaka right now? Because I had seen some reports that it's students themselves who are actually on the streets doing things like directing traffic.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing to see. I have seen in many places, because students say that because as there is no police force in the country, police are not performing their duties. Police are basically, they are scared of public backlash, because during the violence, many police personnel, they were killed. So now students, they think that it is their responsibility, to take care of the traffic management, because I have seen in many parts of Dhaka city that students, they are actually controlling everything. So what the army chief and other political leaders, and even the Bangladesh's president, Mohammad Shahabuddin, they think that, once the interim government is formed, then the public order will be back. And as I mentioned earlier, that, there is a political vacuum here in the country. So as long as, the interim government is not forming, so some sort of uncertainty is still going on. So the student leaders, they think that it is their responsibility to protect things, because there are miscreants who can take the advantage of this political vacuum. That's why they think that they have some sort of, they have to play some roles in maintaining law and order.
Akbar, just one quick final question. Any idea who else might be part of this interim government?
This is not clear yet, because it will depend on Professor Muhammad Yunus, but this is going to be certain that this government would be a non-party interim government, because the Professor Yunus, he may choose people from, retired justice, retired army officers, maybe journalists and lawyers, human rights activists, that it would be a composition of different professional groups that we can understand. And this is not clear how long this interim government will continue. It might be even 6 months, it might be 1 year, 2 years, that's not certain yet. But in the meantime, one of the main political parties in Bangladesh, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, they said that once Professor Yunus takes over, he should arrange an election within 90 days.
I've heard that
but
call too. Akbar, we have to leave it there.
That is very uncertain.
Thank you so much. Good to get the latest.
Okay, so Muhammad Yunus is this guy. He's an economist. He's most famous. He's basically the guy who's given credit for inventing the whole microcredit, microfinance way of development. Again, he's born in Bangladesh, moved to the West. I think he's been was teaching in England. I forget which university for a long time. But that's how he created this Grameen Bank that pioneered microfinance. Again, he's got all these Nobel Peace Prize for 2006 for all of that. Also, Obama gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom early on. And so obviously the students wanted him, and the students have clearly a lot of power now. So that's why he was kind of put in there now. It'll be very interesting to see what he does. And again, how long, yeah, like I said, how long it's going to take for them to have elections. But, and I imagine none of you guys have ever met him or anything like that. Although he's, been in academia for a long time. So who knows, maybe one of you has. But anyone want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I got one question for you, Alex. Is this a positive, progressive coup?
Oh, again, it's an anti-authoritarian, because that's what Sheikh Hasina, the previous prime minister, become increasingly authoritarian. She basically repressed her opposition party. And again, was brutal. What sparked basically the coming down of her government was that I think they killed close to 100 students in one day, and obviously that caused a massive backlash. And literally hundreds of thousands, mostly students, took to the streets of the capital, and told her to go. And the army was not going to stand up to basically 500,000 angry citizens who could literally kill them. So she was obviously forced to resign and to leave. She's left the country. There's some suggestion she's she's going into exile, I think, in India, though that's not official yet. But yeah, so
Alex, what was the what? Tell
Wait, hold it, Jack. Hold it a minute. Let's give the mic to
that's Julian, Professor Spencer William.
Professor.
Yeah.
Hi, Ken. Hi, Alex. Yeah, I just want to give my my 2 cents. I was there 15 years ago doing research with the Bangladeshi military that was operating in Chittagong. And so the downtown was, basically run by the military. They had a golf course right downtown. So I have to put it in perspective. Bangladesh is a very, very large and complex place. It even has unexpected identity divisions that make it a complicated place. About 10% of the population is Hindu. You've got a large non-Bengali population that lives in the Chittagong near Cox's Bazar. Economically, it's very dependent on India. Most of the exports in Bangladesh by value go from Dhaka, which is a port, nominally a port, but they're actually shipped over to Calicut in India. So India's got enormous influence, and there's strong sympathies for China. And it's a peculiar place because they've actually pulled down their very high birth rate. And you have a lot of industrialization in the textiles in the downtown where they only employ women. And this was sort of a cultural social crisis about 2 decades ago. It's probably still there. When I was there 15 years ago, they were complaining about it. The thing about Bangladesh politically, and I've witnessed the hartals. Hartals are these mass strikes where almost the entire population goes on strike. And the political system has been consistently divided between 2 parties. And so half the country will go on strike in support of one party versus the other party. It's a very peculiar thing to see. You also see Islamicization, is particularly from people from the rural areas migrating into the urban areas. Because of course, poor people tend not to be Islamic. They work in the fields. It's the lower middle class that want to identify in this new group. Now, what relates politically to what we've seen is Bangladesh has some of the highest mobilization of voters in the world, and it's sort of a warning. U.S. and Canada, we've got about 60% turnout for votes. In Bangladesh, it's upward of 70 and 80%. And that is a formula for violence. And so if you were to sort of, Google the consequences of the elections in Bangladesh, you have lots of deaths. Now, of course, on an absolute scale, Bangladesh is a very, very large place. But you have, in the best of times, people will be physically assaulted and you'll have limbs cut off in rural areas. I mean, this is an intensely democratic country. Everyone believes that democracy matters, even those people I spoke with in the military. So we have to now. I don't think what we see now with Yunus coming in is going to be a dramatic change. Bangladesh is already very democratic in terms of political culture, like a lot of the South Asian
Julian,
countries.
so it sounds like, if that's how you think, and the military wants to be democratic, so you wouldn't think they would want to maintain themselves in power.
Well, I think
that they would want to transition to a elected government.
Well, I think the bank. Yeah, no, I mean, you're right, Alex. I think the Bangladesh military has learned a lesson in Pakistan, which is the military doesn't have the technical skills to be a political force. It's very inefficient. I'm sitting in a chair of the former Minister of Labor in Canada, Minister Marcel Denis. And when he was in this chair, I got his office when he retired. When he was Minister of Labor, he had sympathies with the sort of the conservative approach to things. When General Zia was overthrown and put on trial, Marcel Denis got on an airplane and flew over to Dhaka to represent him, and he was immediately turned around by the government. And so he's a lawyer. He's a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, so he knew how to defend. So, but the point was that very early on, the Bangladeshis, we're talking 1980, decided against a military regime in the way that Pakistan. But it doesn't mean the military doesn't have a role. I mean, they're politically downtown. They're substantial, and the influence. They're the final force that the government can call upon to deal with the students. But I'll finish on this. The Hartal I saw, the mass strike I saw, and in Bangladesh, because of the limited space, you've got these very tall skyscrapers on limited real estate. And I was sitting on top of this 20-story building looking down, and for as far as I could see, there were people in the streets demonstrating. It was on a scale like nothing I'd ever seen in the Western world in terms of mass strikes. So Bangladeshis are not unsophisticated. They have a Nobel Prize winner in literature. They're culturally sophisticated, and very often in the West we don't appreciate how complex and sophisticated they are. So I mean, I suffice it to say, there's a lot more to this story. I'm just sharing with you my brief stay there 15 years ago.
Okay, right, Dhaka, the population, I should say, the population of Dhaka, I think it's over 20 million. In the metropolitan area there. So that's a lot of people who could be mobilized. But I see Jack wants to.
Yeah, before Jack goes, I just want to throw in one question. Professor, you consider this thumbs up or thumbs down?
Oh, thumbs up. But it's a very, very long process because, of course, the political stability is almost always associated with the strength of the middle class. And Bangladesh has got so many problems. Climate change is having an impact on reducing the water that's coming down the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, which come through Bangladesh. You have massive emigration, which is causing problems in India. You've got the political influence of India. You've got the popular sympathy with China. It's a country that's physically going to lose half of its land in about a century with the rise in sea levels. And I mean, its population is huge. On the other hand, I mean, it's incredibly fertile, like Java. It's a thumbs up in the long, difficult road of democratization. But I mean, all of South Asia is problematic because the turnaround per capita income is $8,000 US. If you have $8,000 per capita US and you've democratized, you will never revert from democratization. But to cross over to democratization below 8,000, you can revert, and many countries have reverted in crises.
Okay, let's bring in Jack, but hang on there, Professor, because you know what Jack's going to say. You don't go away.
Sorry, Julian, I should change my name here. Sorry.
Ken, in the Roman Empire, thumbs up meant give him the sword.
Okay.
And thumbs down meant he can go.
Well, in the U.S.,
I understand.
It's thumbs up means it's okay.
I believe I saw this on BBC, Alex, and I believe what the professor said is really very, very hopeful. I think it's hopeful to get rid of authoritarian governments that can't contain their people. Alex, tell me about this 200 students that were killed. I never heard anything about that. That's what triggered it.
No. I think it's total. I think it's now death toll from all the riots, which again or demonstrations which are happening over the course of weeks. and I'll say a little bit about what started it first, which is essentially, again, the law in Bangladesh was that, to be upwardly mobile, again, of course, you want good education, and they were essentially restricting who could, get into a university. Obviously, they have, a huge population, so you got to choose. And there was a law that guaranteed certain positions for sons and daughters, and well, now grandsons and granddaughters of the people who fought to free Bangladesh from the West Pakistani, where Pakistan proper is now, in 1971. Which are important, but again, essentially this was blocking the upward mobility of the rest of this, especially of the poor. So they got really angry about that, and that's where the protest started. Again, the Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, was increasingly authoritarian. She sent in the police and the military, and they were killing, like a dozen students, I think, and maybe 20 students a day in some cases. And again, this I think it was at least this last row is where they killed at least 74 students in a single day. And the next day, basically, again, a huge, massive crowd came out and marched on her residence. And, you saw her on TV signing that she's resigning and then getting on a helicopter and getting the hell out of there. So that's what, so it goes back again to this law. Because the law was, people saw the law as being subverted to basically by Sheikh Hasina and her party, which is called the Awami League, because the Awami League is, again, the original resistance to Pakistani rule that, again, engaged in guerrilla warfare for like a year and a half before the Indian Army invaded Pakistan in 1971 and just ran over the Pakistani army in what's now Bangladesh was so small that they were easily overrun. And of course, they were surrounded by India, so they had no chance, and easily defeated in a campaign that was a few days. We actually had NIMAS. I don't forget if you were there, Al, but we had a really interesting lecture by two guys who had, because their dads served in the Indian Air Force during, again, the 1971 war. So they came and talked to us actually and showed us some videos of like the attacks on Dhaka, which is really interesting because, again, they're using MiG-21s to strafe downtown Dhaka. They actually turned out to be very good bombers because they were so fast. And yeah, so we had a really interesting lecture with that, but that's, a bit of a tangent. That was a lot of fun. Again, I don't know if you were there, Al. I don't, that was a while back. So, but anything else you want to know, Jack, before we bring in other people? Okay. So I guess Tom, Jim, Steve, did you have anything to add?
Not at the moment.
Or Joan?
Doesn't this all go, like, we're all going back to isolationism now? Everybody wants to be separate. You don't want the community, you don't want to include people. And Modi is doing that in India, because I work with India. I mean, he wants the Hindi, he doesn't want the Muslim. And there's going to be a lot of problems there. But isn't this basically, nobody's listening to anybody? I mean, why do you riot? Why do you protest? Because there's problems that nobody is dealing with. The government is not doing anything like here. So what are you doing? You're protesting, but nobody's hearing you. Nobody's listening to you. I mean, maybe that's like the basics of all the problems. I don't know. That's very naive, I know, but nobody really hears anybody or what they're saying or trying to do anything to make it better. I mean, that's how I feel when I.
Yeah, you're right, Joe. Because again, I think Bangladesh has improved over the years in terms of development. It has a lot more infrastructure and so on, and they've had the economics has improved. But again, they're also remain a very, like India, a very unequal country. And again,
It's
that's
so
been
unequal.
yeah, yeah. And again, remember they had that famous case of the residents for the garment workers, where like 200 people died, were burned to the ground with them inside. Kind of, that's worse than our triangle, the triangle shirtwaist fire that happened, not too far from where I am down, right off Washington Square Park. You can still see the building where it happened.
Right, and I work in the fashion.
Oh, you do?
industry,
Okay.
So
yeah.
I know, and you have that same problem now where we actually, the fashion industry, all the places where the people sewed and the stores where they sold everything and all have disappeared. Like years ago when I started working, you could go on all the streets in Midtown and you could run in and buy this and buy that, and you could get stuff, patterns made. So everything is gone. And when they tried to make it in Hudson Yards, look at what we wound up with. A place where you can't even afford to go there or buy anything. And they're pushing everybody out to Brooklyn Navy Yards, which people don't have the transportation there's no transportation there to even get there. You can't run out and buy a button or a thread and take 2 and 3 hours to do all that. So it seems like, I don't know where we're going here, but like, we're not making anything better. We seem to be making things worse. We're advancing from where? I look back and it's like, we go back to the prehistoric time. We make computers and everything, but we didn't make anything better for people. We sort of, we don't care that people sleep in the street. We don't care about any of that. We close our eyes to all that. And that seems like, even when you go back to prehistoric times, people lived in caves. They didn't live out in the, on the beach and everything, but they took care of each other. But people don't care about each other anymore. They only care about themselves and the money. I mean, that's how I don't know. That's how I see
it. Thank you, Joe. But I think, Julian, you got another thing to say, it sounds like.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be brief. I just want to put something in context, since you raised it, Alex, about the Awami League. What the Bangladeshis directly call their genocide, and they have a museum, a genocide museum, where they claim that 3 million of them were killed. At the time of the occupation, you had about 75 million Bengalis, of which 10 million became refugees in India. It was one of the reasons that Indira Gandhi could basically marshal support. So I've interviewed the commander and the deputy commander of the Pakistani forces. The commander was was Tika Khan, and his deputy was Rao Farman Ali. They're both dead now. The peculiar thing was they were able to travel the world without ever being confronted on war crimes issues. Rao Farman Ali was Pakistan's Minister of Agriculture, and so he lived in Alberta in Canada. For a while. A lot of Pakistanis have families that live in the US and Canada. Now, I actually agree with them that the figure of 3 million was a bit high, and it was probably more like 500,000. But just to put it in context, you had 75 million people, 65 million still in country. You had 40,000 Pakistani soldiers. That's not a lot. But most of the violence against the civilian population was being conducted by immigrants, basically Biharis and people from Orissa. These are the 2 poorest provinces in India where you've got the Naxalites, and they migrated in and they were converted to Islam, and the Pakistani army used them to terrorize the villages and to clear out the population. Now, for Bangladesh, you cannot raise the topic that 3 million is too many. I was told.
Right.
That, it's a sort of.
I think there's laws, and I remember there's a word that they use for essentially, the collaborators with the Pakistanis, which I can't remember off the top of my head. It started with an R. Do you remember what it is?
No, no, I don't
something
remember.
Like reconnaissance or something. Yeah.
Something Razakars.
Like yeah. They have right. And I think there's even a few years ago they did prosecute, I think, some people and even executed some people for the crimes during.
Yeah, the tragedy was that many of the officers.
Ken, did you? Yeah.
So sorry, Alex.
No, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, no, the tragedy was many of the officers didn't want to get involved. And of course, the ones I interviewed suffered PTSD because they'd been kept in prison for several years as a part of India's negotiation to repatriate the Pakistani soldiers after they returned. And the military officer corps was largely ethnically mixed. And the assistant to the Quaid-e-Azam, who's the founder of Pakistan, was one of the officers whose sons was there. And this man was Pashtun. His wife was Bengali. And so for the relatively educated Pakistani officer class who were of mixed ethnicity, the war in Bangladesh, I mean, basically just tore the fabric of the moderates, and it's a very sad to see. But anyway, but the point was that Bangladesh today, a lot of its identity is based upon that very traumatic experience when you've got, something like 20% of your 15 to 20% of your population turned into refugees. Well, thank you, Alex.
Yeah. Okay,
Alex, can you go on to another?
Did you have a piece? Oh, you don't have anything, but well, we can just go to Iran. I got a CNN thing on that.
Okay, I'll pull something up after that.
No, I got.
You got? Okay.
I got. This is probably what you're probably gonna something like this anyway. So this is well, not the latest, but a pretty recent piece. Yeah, that's doing on potential regional war in the Middle East, which God should all hope doesn't happen. But here's what they have to say.
When and how will Iran strike back for Israel's?
Can you zoom in on her a little bit?
As well as top military. That question hanging over the Middle East this hour.
Full screen,
say Iran and its affiliates are preparing to respond possibly
an increase of volume
in the coming days. Right now, diplomats from Islamic nations are meeting in an emergency session in Saudi Arabia at Iran's request. They are expected to urge restraint from Tehran and condemn Israel over its suspected killing of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Iran recently. Yahya Sinwar, an alleged architect of the October the 7th attacks, has been tapped to replace Haniyeh. Among those working at that meeting in Jeddah, Jordan's foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, has been conducting a flurry of talks to diffuse tensions. He stopped in Iran on Sunday, the first such visit by a top Jordanian official in 20 years. Ayman Safadi stepping away from that meeting in Jeddah to talk to us. This is his first interview since he was in Tehran, and you have been with the acting foreign minister of Iran today. So I want to get your sense of Iran's thinking at this point as the region awaits for what is threatened retaliation by Iran on Israel. What do you understand to be Tehran's position at this point? And what are they trying to achieve with this meeting, Foreign Minister?
Good evening, Vicky. We are in very, very dangerous situation in the region following the assassination of the head of the political bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. Tensions have risen, obviously. What we in Jordan are saying is that the region cannot afford further conflict, further war, further destruction, and we must stop this escalation. And the first step towards stopping the escalation is ending its root cause, which is the continued Israeli aggression on Gaza. Everybody has to realize that the situation is extremely dangerous. The threat of the region being dragged into regional war is real. We do want this escalation to stop. We've been working very hard to achieve that, and we're 100% convinced that the first step towards that de-escalation is stopping the aggression on Gaza. Iran, obviously, I had discussions with the Iranian foreign minister, the Iranian president in Tehran a few years ago. I went there at the invitation of the foreign minister to try and see what we can do to bring the temperature down. They believe that they've been done a great wrong, and they believe they have the right to respond. So what we're trying to do is, again, to create the conditions in which everybody will see value in de-escalating, and that would be ending the aggression, getting a permanent ceasefire, and then urging everybody to act responsibly and prevent the whole region from falling into the abyss further.
While the US Secretary of State has said that these ceasefire talks are in their final stages, sources that I talk to around this region suggest that we are not close at this point. So given that, and given that the appeal to Iran has been from both you and others, that a ceasefire is what we should be pushing for here, and retaliation by default not, what is it that Tehran hopes to achieve today in Jeddah? Is this just a holding pattern at this point? We're not going to get a ceasefire today or tomorrow. I think you and I would agree on that. So is this just a holding pattern at this point by Tehran? Can we, do you believe, expect to see that threatened retaliation in the days to come?
Well, as I said, Becky, the danger is real. I think our meeting today will not be able to bring about a ceasefire. I think Iran and Palestine called for this emergency meeting to try and rally Arab Muslim position behind condemning the assassination of Haniya, and to urge for more effective work by the international community to end the aggression on Gaza. Again, I think we need to do something really transformative here. I think regardless of where Iran is, where Israel is at this point, if we are to force Israel to accept a ceasefire in the aggression in Gaza, ensure that we get that permanent ceasefire, then we would have created enough reason for everybody to say enough is enough. Now we have an opportunity at real de-escalation, and we should move towards that. So the talks on the ceasefire are obviously complicated, particularly after the assassination of the chief negotiator from the Hamas side, which is, we believe, is a violation of international law and a reckless move that we condemned as a crime. But beyond that, where do we stand now? We have two paths: a path that will drag the region further into the abyss of war, or a path that would say enough is enough and save the region from the devastation of an all-out war. And we believe that if we throw into the discourse a real promise of a ceasefire, then we believe everybody will have a strong argument to say, let's not escalate any further. Everybody must exercise self-restraint and use the opportunity of a ceasefire to go further towards calming the temperature in the region at all.
Ismail Haniyeh, described by the Qataris as the lead negotiator, of course, for Hamas in those indirect talks. His assassination is, as you suggest, complicating any mediation effort. Surely you accept that the appointment of Yahya Sinwar, seen by Israel as the architect of the October 7th deadly attacks, his appointment as the political leader for Hamas at this point must further complicate the potential for any success in these ceasefire talks, doesn't it?
We are already in a very complex situation. The war on Gaza has been ongoing for 10 months. The devastation it has produced is beyond description. And we all rallied behind efforts to bring about that exchange deal to reach that permanent ceasefire that we want. But look, we've been to the door and back so many times in regards to the discussion. So I will not really say that we are near or not near until we see that deal happening. But I think the bottom line is that if there is a will to achieve that ceasefire, we believe that it can be achieved. The challenge that we have is that Every time we get near, Israel does something that complicates the situation further, including, as you pointed to, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in the middle of negotiations, which the US, Qatar, and Egypt were saying we are achieving some progress. So you come and assassinate the chief negotiator, undermine the whole process, and continue with the war in Gaza. Our message to the whole world, Becky, is that enough is enough. Enough killing and destruction has taken place. The only path forward is really to bring about an immediate ceasefire that will help de-escalate the regional situation, will save the region from the abyss of further conflict, and will protect the region from the agenda of Netanyahu, who continues to provoke, continues to escalate, and every time there's a glimpse of hope, he does something that pushes us back to the edge of the abyss. So the question is, do we allow Netanyahu and his radical government to impose their agenda on the region and doom it, therefore, to a future of more conflict? Or do we do what we all believe is right and bring about that permanent and immediate ceasefire, and then work with everybody to make sure that we are on a path that will ensure that everything that has happened since October 7 does not happen again?
Okay. So I'm sure everybody has a different opinion on what the Jordanian foreign minister was just saying. Although I would just say I agree with them totally that Netanyahu is the barrier to this ceasefire, and we know why. He knows he's going to jail if the war ends. Jim, Julian, well, Al, what do you guys think of, and of the whole, what are, I guess, handicap at this point? What do you think the odds are of a regional war in the Middle East? I would say like probably 15% chance that we get that, which I think will be really bad. But yeah. But anyway, and there you are, Ted. If you want to jump into. Come on, I mean, Jim, you got to have some thoughts here. Jack.
Alex?
Yeah.
I agree with you. I saw a different report on the same story, and they came to the same conclusion. The impediment to peace, the impediment to any type of arrangement is to not kill the negotiator. That's more moderate. The fellow that now is the leader is going to be even more hardline.
It's probably exactly what Netanyahu, part of the Israelis wanted. Again, I mean, he definitely, I think, wants to. He's doing what he's doing to sabotage. Because like I said, if things end, he's literally going. Well, not just him, but his wife too is going to jail for their corruption charges, because he'll be voted out of office, won't have immunity anymore, and the courts will pick him up. But Julian,
I actually thought Netanyahu was the moderate. I mean, so I made a simulation for my class about 15 years ago, simulating precisely that. I call it the Iran-Israel crisis. You can download it from Vassal, and because I couldn't figure out what a war would look like between Israel and Iran, and the reality is there can't be a war between Israel and Iran. Iran fired. They shot their opportunity. They fired a bunch of rockets at Israel, and I guess in an extended, cost-effective exchange, American and Canadian and British interceptors are more expensive than incoming Iranian reverse-engineered junk that they got from North Korea. But there's just no physical way of them making contact. The Houthis are a pain in the butt, but I did some research on them, and they've been a pain in the butt for about 3 centuries. So you just have to sort of adapt to hostile coastal populations when they're coming from a very poor place. I mean, I obviously, as long as the U.S. backs Israel, the Israelis are not going to bend. For me, it's tragic because I look at how South Africa eventually ended apartheid. Eventually, they had the Broederbund, the secret society that sort of linked government and business, and they basically came to a conclusion that, after 20 years of zero growth and isolation, and the fact that they were being abandoned by Margaret Thatcher bit by bit, meant that they had to come to terms with their neighbors. At some point, Israel's got to do that. The Iranians, I have a co-author who's an Iranian journalist, and we were writing about when you had the hijab riots about a year ago. And Iran is very divided politically. Obviously, a large number of Iranians are not happy with sort of their I'm not sure what to call it. I don't think it's Greater Persia. I don't think it's Pan-Islamic, but it's sort of the focused targeting of Israel. Most Iranians just want to go about their lives, and get past the corruption and get past the inefficient state. That being said, there is a very strong consensus in Iran for a traditional Iranian sphere of influence. And I wrote an article with my Persian co-author. Iran has been dealing with Europeans putting a fleet at the mouth of the Straits of Hormuz for 450 years, of which the U.S. is only the most recent iteration. On the demand for the Iranians to have to exclude non-regional players in the Persian Gulf, they're going to stick to that. I just had an article published with a Pakistani colleague of mine from the National Defense University and the same Iranian author, looking at the Iranians firing, rockets into Pakistan, right? Which is, for the Pakistanis was, a very strange thing. But it shows you how much the Iranians are leaning on nationalism because they feel dissatisfied by the treatment of their neighbors. So I think a normal Iran, and this is not U.S. national interest, obviously, a normal Iran would be far less aggressive with regard to Israel, but equally adamant on having influence in the Persian Gulf. And so I think I think a change of government, sort of a liberalization over probably over a decade or 2 decades is inevitable. But there's so much corruption in Iran that it's like the Dutch disease. They have so much oil, they have no incentive to have an efficient economy like Bahrain, which ran out of energy a long time ago and had to go into banking. So I can't make any specific predictions on this violence, but I think I think Israel could find a modus vivendi with Iran. I don't think the U.S. will for a very long time because of the oil coming out of the Persian Gulf and because the Iranians don't want to budge on that.
Right. Actually, I put in the chat this book I'll show in a minute. That I picked up years ago from the Strand. That's an excellent on Yemen, and it's because it gets into the guy's story, gets into the history of Yemeni resistance to foreigners, which again has been a long time. Again, remember Yemenis were fighting with and against the Prophet Muhammad back in the 7th century and against Islam back then. They have some also really interesting connection with Christian Ethiopia in the late ancient period into the early medieval period. So there's some really interesting, and there's also this book specifically on the Houthis that I'd recommend.
Can I add a follow-up question, Alex, to Julian?
Yeah.
Julian, you said this has been going on for centuries. You said the Houthis, what's going on for centuries. And I didn't know that. The bare amount of research I did showed that, according to Wikipedia, not the most reliable, it started in 1990. The Houthis got together and started a rebellion to get control of Yemen. So
yeah, no, I'm thinking of the Yemeni, not the Houthis. But I can tell you an anecdote of the Houthis. One of my students, who's Armenian, worked for an oil company, and the reason the Armenians were, obviously the Armenians have been reasonably well distributed in the Middle East, but the Armenian interest in helping Canadian oil companies in Yemen was because the Armenians have a special access to Ethiopia because they're the land tenure system is controlled by monasteries. And so he told me that there were tense relations this is the mid-90s, tense relations between the Canadian oil company. And so there's a security guy that restricted where he could go, and they had to negotiate with the Houthis when they were doing exploration. So I don't know about the Houthis, but I know about the British in the Crater City, and having to deal with the Yemeni that were very often funded by the Arabians, sort of, hostile to the fact that the British were located there.
Okay, so there's been
right, and then on that to kind of add to so the Houthis, the Houthi, it's basically a particular large Yemeni clan, but they're part of the so-called Zaidi Shia Islamic sect. Let me put up their Wikipedia here. These guys, and again, they go back, as you see here, all the way back to the 8th century. And
zoom
again,
in,
there's
zoom in.
Yeah. So okay. So they go back to 8th century, and again, they're part, the Shia part, half of, little less than half of Islam. They have, different branches, and they all quibble about, which of the descendants of Muhammad's son-in-law Ali is the rightful branch. And of course, they claim one of the branches for their version, their offshoot of Shia Islam. So again, so they're so-called, fibers, which again is they trace the lineage from here. Muhammad al-Bakir, who's the 5th descendant of the 5th generation down from Ali, who again is, killed by the Sunnis very, right after Muhammad's death. And he essentially tried to take over the caliphate from the religion, but he basically got killed and shut down by kind of the military faction within the early Islam. So again, there are also Seveners who again they go with I think it's who's the Hussein, who's the 7th Imam after Ali. So again, there are all these little.
Okay. Oh, you're not.
It's kind of like different branches of Protestant or Catholic.
Okay, but it's a little bit more.
Those
wars end in a while.
So again, this goes.
Alex, you're not taking sides on the Houthi.
No. I'm just actually on this. I'm just stating again what.
Okay, so I got a question.
Branches. Yeah.
Let me ask a question to you two guys. Both of you. Do you think there can ever be a resolution in the Middle East or Muslim countries, but mostly in the Middle East, as long as there's a conflict between the Sunnis and the Shiites? They don't seem. It seems to be the core of justification for conflicts, at least in the Middle East. Maybe not Indonesia or some other countries, but in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon.
Well, I'll let Julian. I'll let Julian go first, and then I'll give my opinion on that.
Go ahead.
Go on, Julian.
All right, so I have a fairly controversial interpretation on this, and it's sort of cultural. There are many different cultural explanations for how Arab culture relates to conflict. You have, Kenneth Pollock, MIT PhD, then CIA, and he has a particular cultural approach. There are many Israeli scholars who look at the role of language and networking. I'm partial to a theory that was developed in a poor part of southern Italy called amoral familism, which is when you have people who are very poor living in an environment, they focus on the family and to the exclusion of the state. And so I know it sounds rather peculiar, but you can explain things like the civil war in Syria by basically access to sex. So you have an individual male, and he grows up with the family, and he's always taking care of his parents and, within the family. When that individual gets married, they then bring their parents into the home with them. In other words, this individual is never independent. They're never a solitary individual. They're always a part of a network. And until recently, half of the world's population married cousins, and they married cousins because they had to keep property in the family. Every successful state broke that family. So you have Han Wu-Ti in China, right? This is the 2nd dynasty after the foundation of China. You have Pope Leo IX. They break the family by banning cousin marriage. Islam is a very weak religion. It doesn't ban cousin marriage, and therefore it inhibits the creation of the state because people will never sacrifice for the state. When I was in Egypt interviewing Egyptian soldiers, I'd ask them, do you love Egypt? And they would say, no. I mean, I hate Egypt. I hate the government. I hate the other people. In other words, there's low trust levels. In Israel, you have Golda Meir, who, to the extent I understand her biography, she abandons her husband and her child to become prime minister. In Egypt, no one would abandon their family to help the culture of Egypt. So when you're talking about Sunni and Shia, you're actually talking about two separate sex groups. Now, I actually find the Shia more moderate because they have a zakat where you have to contribute 10% of your wealth, and the Shia are a lot more moderate and give you a lot more choice as to where you put your charity money than the Sunni. But if you look at Syria, these are not people that mix. So if you as a young man want to get a wife, it has to be from among one of your cousins, and you'll be very hostile if that individual is going to go marry someone else. It's one of the problems with the West in Afghanistan, which is we showed up and said, all women are going to get an education and will be free of their families. Instant, that's a death sentence. The Russians did the same stupid thing in the 80s. You do not steal people's daughters and their future wives, right? Especially in an amoral familial culture. So it's not, for me, it's not a question of Sunni versus Shia. It's modernization and it's breaking of the family. But you have a negative, which you can get railroaded. Saddam Hussein knew this, right? He broke the family and he won the UN Medal of Education by telling his secret police to make everyone get educated. So everyone got educated, and he put a woman in charge of his biological weapons program. But what does a guy like that do? Well, he starts building nuclear weapons, right? So, modernization is dangerous, right? Because these people, once you've gotten rid of the family, you've atomized society, you can control individuals. And if you have a totalitarian dream, you can, go off and pursue it. So that's my, academic answer, which is, the answer to understanding violence in the Middle East is in southern Italy. It's amoral familialism.
It's enlightening. Thank you.
Right. Let me just
Alex,
add.
you're next.
We'll go to Jack in a minute, but I just want to say, if we look at, there are periods in the history of the Middle East and Islam where there are pretty good Shia. Obviously, they consider each other heretics, kind of in the way that Eastern and Western Christians consider. Because again, they would fight, but remember who Saladin is. Saladin is a Shia Christian, Kurd, again, from, leading Muslim armies against the foreigner, against, with the Western Christians, Third Crusade. But, again, there's a period where, with the Ottomans, I'm thinking early on, Suleiman and his successors, where they're like, there are wars with, I forget which dynasty it is, at the Safavids maybe, in Persia. But, those were tough fights, but I don't think it was really, it wasn't explicitly religious or Shia versus Sunni. And they would make truces, they would, one side, usually the Ottomans would do better, but, Persia was never conquered by the Ottomans, even though Persia had been, overrun entirely by early Islam and by different, Persia was overrun like the whole Middle East was by the Mongols before that. But yeah, I mean, I just, sometimes I think too much is put on, this kind of sectarian. Plus, there's also the use, again, the U.S. has done this of kind of, amping the sectarian divides for their own imperialist purposes. But Jack, I think you had your hand up before, so let's go to you.
It's more of an inane comment. Being from Southern Italians, I would just call it tribalism and family relationships. But the truth is that if you can't trust somebody, you're in a lot of trouble if you get involved in their family. So part of that is a necessary consequence. I mean, look at the other stories we were talking about. If the government comes after hundreds of people, what do you do? Whereas if the hooligans come after your brother because, you know, some other guy murdered 4 girls, what do you do?
Right.
So
Oh yeah, and then just before we go back to Julian, I know since we have a really great Japanese historian, Ted Cook here, I'd want to ask you, how does Japan fit into this whole, you know, issue of marrying cousins and state formation that he was bringing up? What's Japan's history in terms of, you got a new Ted?
Yeah. No, that's a, you know, there's a huge question that you have to raise there. First of all, the Japanese believe in adoption of heirs, and have had this habit deeply ingrained in Japanese history, going way back to the early years of the when it mattered whether you had property or not. So if you go back to the period of the tale of Genji, for example, where you have a court which doesn't really rule anything except, but it has constables out in the countryside who are supposed to be sending money to the center. And that era ends when they stop sending the money in, and it breaks into military factions. But in order to have an heir, if you don't have a male heir, you can adopt somebody else's son to become the male heir. And this is fundamentally the core of the 16th century Japanese warlord politics. It's one of the reasons you have all of the hostage taking. People want a natural heir, preferably, and so you keep the heir at your castle, his heir at your castle, and vice versa, to exchange people, and then you start exchanging potential daughters and who might be future wives, and then you end up getting parents, mothers that are being held as hostage for one another. But ultimately, the real reason here is that there's always a solution if you don't have a male heir. You adopt somebody else's and bring them into your family. You change their name, and so modern Japanese in the 19th century accepted this into the marriage law pattern in the 1890, 1889 Japanese fundamental law of modern Japan, when the Constitution was instituted in 1890. It has it's the Family Registration Act. Everyone has to be part of a family, and you register. And I ran into this, the tail end of it, even through American revision of the Japanese Constitution, when I tried to bring my wife's ashes back to her family in Japan. I didn't have access to her koseki. I was on her koseki, her marriage registration figure, but she was an individual. Her family, if she was part of a Japanese family, she was part of that family, but I was on her koseki. And since because she was dead, I had no access to her because I'm not married to a Japanese. Why? Because she's dead. 50 years of marriage don't matter in that situation. So it was very, very difficult, and it required 4 or 5 family levels to reach that point. So I'm just saying, in this case, I think Julian has obviously touched on a very important point in the relationship of any civilization. If you go back to the family, that's where you should start with any analysis. And a lot of societies, families don't work very well, because when families reach crisis and they're too big, when you have too many relatives, you get the French Revolution, right? you have everybody inherits the title. That's supposed to be a joke, but it is true. If you have just one inheritor of the property, as happened in England, you get a
primogenitor.
No, primogeniture. No, I understood. Yeah, I had the word, but I wasn't going to use it. Yeah, primogeniture is the word. But in France, they didn't have that, so you end up splitting up the society. But going back to Japan.
Oh no, just
Thank you for the nice comment about Japan. I think it's very, very important for the Japanese, for example, to understand Japan in the 19th century historically. One has to realize that half the names you're looking at, say back before the 19th century, are the name the person was born with, and the family name they were born with is usually a different family than the one that they get in history. So many of the Japanese historical leaders, you will find out, not only do they change their name when they become an adult, which is to avoid bad luck, that you don't want to have a child named with a real name, but you got to use them because you might, the spirits might get them. So, and that's very much out of Genji. If you read the tale of Genji, you'll realize that, even going back to the 12th century, in the 10th and 11th century. But in studying Japanese, even the attempt for the Japanese government, this is one of my hobby horses, but let me just say this for a couple seconds. Modern Japanese society was invented in the 19th century as Japan attempted to mesh Japanese society into the international legal system, international world system, the way to make Japan an equal and on this equal playing field of Western European democracies. They adopted the Western European code of law. The Code Napoleon is a Japanese code of law, and then you have this problem called the emperor system. Well, the emperor system had been no problem at all for 700 years by the point you get to the 19th century, but everybody else has got a king or a president, and they had a religion. So suddenly, state Shinto is invented in the 19th century. So is the imperial system that we talk about, the emperor, and the idea of telling time by emperor's years is completely never existed before the Meiji.
We're still talking about this issue of Iran and Israel, correct?
Yeah, Jim.
All right. Well, first of all, for Jordan to make a statement like that, where 40% of the population is Palestinian, and essentially I would interpret that kind of political statement.
When the squirrels hold their ground, the macaques have another trick.
Someone turn that fucking
the right
off.
fruit to go.
Steve, I think that's you.
You gotta mute, Steve. Basically, you have to look on that.
They know that the squirrels won't follow them down to the ground.
Steve's watching a program about macaques, I think. You might turn that on.
I see. All right, whatever. You have to sort of see that there's all these multi-faceted aspects of Middle East diplomacy, particularly a situation like this. And I would argue that what you're seeing Jordan do up front is demonstrate a particular strand of what Biden would like to do in terms of the foreign policy in the situation. That is, have a ceasefire and basically outmaneuver Netanyahu. Now, Netanyahu, reason why he killed, why they assassinated the individual in Tehran is an interesting question. I don't know what the actual mechanics of the negotiations are with Israel. And if you recall, these negotiations were also being conducted with Jordanian intelligence involved, Egyptian intelligence involved, Saudi intelligence involved, and the CIA involved also, along with the State Department. The CIA director would fly in there. There'd be these sort of negotiations at the top level of the intelligence agencies around the hostage crisis. So what they were trying to achieve and why it was decided to greenlight assassinating Haniyeh is an interesting question. Is it a reflection of the extreme cabinet in Israel? Possibly, probably. But again, they tried to kill Haniyeh a few times. He's been on the target list for quite a while. So that's an interesting question. And then remember, it was also accompanied with a raid into Beirut that killed a senior IRGC commander. And the axis of resistance, the whole allies of Iran that have been organized for, frankly, you could go back to the early 80s when that whole effort began between Israel and the United States and Iran, fighting essentially a war. They've been at war with each other ever since the revolution in different ways. It's escalated at certain times, and then, but it's always it's a constant war going on between those three powers. And we just now see this uptick spilling over into this, situation starting October 7th. Now, putting Sinwar in charge is to me quite interesting because, he's somewhere deep in the catacombs of Gaza, surviving. So how can he communicate easily with the negotiators outside? He's essentially seeing that international opinion is increasingly on the side of the Palestinians. They theoretically had a brokered agreement in China with Hamas and Fatah just in the past month. And so there's all these indications, if I was someone in Hamas's leadership, let's wait it out. Let's wait it out and see what we get in terms of a new administration. Now, if Trump is elected, it's interesting because Netanyahu obviously is banking on Trump getting elected. But if Kamala is elected, well, it's interesting. She didn't show up when Netanyahu was there in Congress. she's distanced herself from a direct association with the policy of Biden. Now, it's going to be impossible for her to completely disassociate herself from that, but it just shows you the tragic constraints and limitations of all these players in terms of trying to reach some sort of negotiated peace, because that, of course, would benefit the Democrats. But look at the situation with Netanyahu. It reminds you of what happened with Nixon with Madame Chennault in 1968, when Madame Chennault was encouraged Nguyen Van Tu and the other senior leadership of the South Vietnam to not agree to going to the Paris peace talks, because that would have essentially been very powerful and helped Humphrey to win the election. So you could have a similar situation like this going on domestically with Netanyahu. I'm positive. And even today, I understand there was a shift in polling data in New York State of all states in terms of Jewish voting regarding their support versus Biden versus Trump. There's actually an uptick in support, although I think nationwide Jewish vote.
To what, though? What's the breakdown, Jim?
The breakdown was actually there had been an uptick in support for Trump. Now, remember, Trump has made.
But like around what, like 30%? Or what?
No, there was a poll that said it was even higher than that. So I was sort of surprised about that. But that just has to be verified. And then they're sort of saber rattling. They're talking about preemptively attacking Iran. We're moving assets into the region to, I think an aircraft carrier group is now moving into the Eastern Mediterranean. So they're going to set up and be prepared for another kind of defense against a missile attack. Although who knows how Iran will do it this time, because you still have the question of Hezbollah and whether Hezbollah decides to go, nuts with its 150,000 missiles up there in Lebanon, which would provoke a general war. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to have a general war. I think even Iran is, even the hardliners in Iran are, they want to, quote, do a demonstration similar to what happened when they launched that air missile attack a couple of months ago, which we know they claimed was quite successful, but we obviously have reports it was a total failure. But we're forgetting the political temperature. Now, the other point you guys were making about historical determinism and how that affects Shia Sunni splits. The Arab uprisings, the Arab Spring demolished a lot of that, particularly in countries where there was populist, across the board, religious, ethnic cooperation, like in Egypt. And we know, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood emerged after that as the powerful force, which is what people were afraid of. And then, of course, the government, they were put down by the military. But the possibility of internal revolts, where you have cross confessional alliances occurring because of unpopular rulers, is always a problem and a present danger to those regimes in the Middle East. And to sit there and talk about the Sunni Shia splits, they tend to get transcended in any kind of careful examination of colonial struggles that occurred in the Middle East after 1945. They were there. There's no doubt about it. Muslim Brotherhood was a force, but there was also temporary alliances across political boundaries with sectarian groups and traditional groups that one could see. So there's always that risk that you could have a situation begin to ignite and unfold. Now, I hope, Alex, we talk about what is to me the major story yesterday, what happened to the Democratic Party, before we decide to call it a night. But that's just my initial assessment. It's a very interesting, concerning
and just
situation.
To go with what you said, Jim, I just put up the map from South Front showing current carrier strike group locations as of yesterday. Showing it's the Theodore Roosevelt, the Gulf of Oman, and I guess.
Did you zoom in? A little too much.
Well,
okay, good.
So obviously this is in the area, and this is the one that they're going to move. It looks like into the
okay.
Med. Yeah.
Could I make a request?
And they also have one. You can see there's one not too far from Taiwan. If anything happens there, maybe that,
Okay.
I don't know if that's their intent, but yeah.
Before we leave the topic, can we see if there's any response to what Jim is saying? There's less importance of tribal rivalries and the history of that.
Yeah, so let's, Mike
response.
hasn't,
I think Julian's got a response on that.
No, but Mike hasn't
Well,
said
yeah, I know,
anything.
but let's get Julian's response and then Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, very briefly, I want to say something later about Yemen, but on Jim's point, he's quite right. There's a lot of cooperation between, at least from what I've seen in Pakistan, between the Sunni and the Shia. There's some suspicion, but it's more ethnic. The Pashtun, who happen to be Sunni, don't trust Iranians who have influence over Afghanistan, and because they dominate the intelligence services, you get this institutional suspicion, but you don't get a huge street violence in the urban areas outside of the remote regions between Sunni and Shia. Most of the violence that you have is in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Balochistan or in the Azad Kashmir in the north. So Jim is, I think, completely right.
Mike, get your 2 cents in.
Well, no, I was just going to say that I don't see what the brain surgery is about what happened with the assassination in Iran. They got rid of the Hamas leader who was less willing to, well, may have been willing to change the racist basis of Hamas, etc. He was less of an extremist. At least he was willing to negotiate to some degree. You get rid of him. The Hamas rank and file plays right into Netanyahu's playbook, falls into the trap. They make Sinwar their new leader. Therefore, there's nothing to negotiate anymore. You have the most extreme reactionary person in charge of Hamas now. So therefore, Hamas is still the this Nazistic or perceived as Nazistic organization. And Netanyahu, then there's no point in negotiating. As a matter of fact, Hamas doesn't negotiate. This doesn't seem, again, this isn't brain surgery. It's a cause and effect thing, and that's what I think Netanyahu was trying to achieve, and that's what the trap Hamas fell into. So that's it. In other words, now Netanyahu can continue the war and also say that Hamas isn't going to negotiate, or if they do negotiate, it's going to be under the most ridiculous, unreasonable, irrational term. So that was, I mean, I don't know if that was the only purpose of the assassination, but that was the effect that was achieved. And as far as the sectarian violence that's going on, there may be temporary stops to this, but it's gonna brew up again. I'm a little cynical about the whole situation now, but I don't think this idea of world peace is becoming more of a figment of our more idealistic imaginations. Sorry, people aren't in a frame of mind for any type of peace, any type of consistent peace. People want what they want, and they're going to keep on going until they get it, and it won't stop. That's my thing for my temporary foray into this meeting tonight.
Okay, so Jim wanted to talk about Governor Walz, so I think I'm just going to play a little piece from NBC.
Today, J.D. Vance has repeatedly criticized part of Tim Walz's service in the Army National Guard. Vance is also a Marine veteran himself. Where is this coming from? What's the attack line?
Right. Vance served in the Marine Corps. He served 6 months on a deployment during the Iraq War, in which he served in the Public Affairs Unit. And he, in these last 24 hours, is taking direct shots politically at his now other opposing vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, namely around his 24 years of service in the Army National Guard. And notably, right before he ran for Congress in 2006, he retired from the National Guard, and J.D. Vance contends in order to avoid serving a deployment in Iraq himself. Take a listen.
Walz did say on camera that I carried a gun in a war.
well, which war did you carry a gun in? Because you apparently never went to a war zone. That is a totally reasonable question to ask. And I think the evidence at this point is overwhelming that he lied about serving in a combat zone.
Of course, with just under 3 months left, a lot of this is the first introduction to the American public as to who both of these individuals are. And so there is a quick, fast effort here by both sides to try to lay claim to their own biographies for the American electorate that is going to be making this important decision in November.
And Yamiche, what's the response to that allegation that he lied about his service?
Well, the Harris campaign is really leaning into the idea that they see Tim Walz, and Tim Walz sees himself as a servant to the American people. And they also put out a statement, and I want to read part of it. It says, after 24 years of military service, Governor Walz retired in 2005 and ran for Congress, where he chaired Veteran Affairs and was a tireless advocate for our men and women in uniform. And as vice president, he will continue to be a relentless champion for our veterans and our military family. So that is the Harris campaign response. But I can also tell you, it's probably going to get even feistier than that. Just yesterday in Philadelphia, Governor Walz was talking about the idea that he can't wait to debate J.D. Vance, saying that he needs to get off his couch and come to debate him. So definitely going to hear more of that language too.
Yamiche, just to be clear, there's no direct response to that allegation that he lied about serving in a war zone.
I haven't heard them say he's not lying. What they're saying is that he served his country both as a veteran and also as a Congress member.
Understood. Yamiche Alcindor and Yvonne Hilliard, thanks to you both.
Right. Well, Jim and I were talking about this before earlier today when we were in person. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a swift boat campaign, which of course we saw with Senator Kerry's presidential nomination. That was, of course, quite successful. But yeah, I'm sure. All right, Jim, I guess.
Well, look at Kerry. I mean, Kerry, there was a Green Beret who fell off Kerry's swift boat, and Kerry dived and got the guy out from drowning. And that, of course, was ignored in the attacks on Kerry by the people that were mobilized. So we're going to see a repeat of this with this vice presidential candidate, and they're going to try to make that to be the negative discussion. And I don't think that anything he said implied that he went to Iraq. Now, I think what they're trying to do is essentially accuse him of being a coward by retiring before his artillery. I think they got two guys in the unit who are NCOs, probably didn't like him. He was a command sergeant major. Who the hell knows what the story is? But they're going to do, a swift boat ad, just like they did against Kerry. They're going to do it against him because they know that this particular part of his bio, and watching the guy perform yesterday, I mean, the guy did a pretty good job, with sort of his responses, such as mind your own business, and some of the other things he said about Trump and Vance, that they're just weird. I thought that was actually pretty brilliant and folksy. But we'll see what happens. The honeymoon period going on with her right now, and that's going to get abruptly disturbed next few weeks with the DNC. We'll see what happens there. But it's an interesting situation going on, and right now she's actually leading Trump in a whole bunch of different polls.
Right, but we also interested to see if they go after Trump on his, all of Trump's, Mr. Bone Spurs. But let's go to Jack and then Ted.
Yeah, Alex, I don't know if everybody's up on that story as much as my wife is, because I listen to it all the time. He did serve in Iraq, and he also had military injury. He was disabled by artillery. He lost his hearing, and he figured it was best for him to get away because he would already been in the military and did go to Iraq. I believe he was in Iraq, but 3 years before that.
Okay.
So no. Let facts talk for what we don't hear when the media tells us what's going on. I believe we have a real problem with our media because people that will swift boat you aren't really doing the honest thing, which is if you can judge a guy by a lie rather than understand he spent 25 years there. And I think what Jim said is really true. There's always going to be somebody who's going to have a gripe if you're really in the service I mean, you know, you're standing next to somebody and you may have to rely on their doing the right thing, or maybe sometimes it doesn't work out that way, where your safety or your circumstance is in their hands, and you have to make, you know, either you have to watch their back or you have to watch your back, or you have to, you know, remember that this is this can be dangerous. I don't know what to say, but I believe that what was said about the other people that have you know said I'm not going to serve. I believe the whole thing about service, and me and Jim had long talks about this. It's the whole idea that somebody's going to stab you in the back because you served your country. Really, JD, you served your country by being in communications. You know, my father was a translator. He never left Nebraska. But unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, that was very important to the war effort. So I don't think a war was made just by a guy carrying a gun. And I think for people to just, you know, take this gentleman down because he said he was in a war zone, but then he had a hearing disability and he got out of the service after 25 years. I mean, come on, what are you going to do? You're going to blame people for, you know, doing overtime their last year of service if they can collect in their retirement? Come on. This is America. Everybody's in for their own self-interest. And if I was made deaf by, you know, he got in the military when he was 17, Alex. All right, it's the Air National Guard, but we didn't say anything about George Bush when he flew around, you know, what was it, Alabama? What an American hero they are.
Louisiana,
Okay.
I think. But yeah.
Louisiana.
Oh, no, and I just say there, yeah, you know, this goes back to, I mean, I
Fault
always
of the
thought it was
media.
amazing that George McGovern, that they never emphasized his, you know, very heroic service in World War II as a bomber pilot. I always thought that, you know, to let like Nixon kind of basically call him a coward.
Okay.
But let's
Yeah,
Ted.
That was the. That was
all right. Let's go to Ted and then Ken. Go ahead.
No, what was extraordinary there was just the idea that to dare to use the term stolen valor. I mean, the idea that even using that such a term, which is what horrified me. It's one thing to say, you know, he didn't, but he was 41 years old when he joined the military in 17. He was served 24 years as a reservist, but he rose to the very top rank of the enlisted ranks. He was the highest listed. He will be if he elected vice president. And actually, as a congressman, he was the highest ranking enlisted man who had ever been in the Congress. Most of them are officers. I think JD was a corporal, right, when he was in Vietnam. I mean, in Iraq. So it wasn't like we were dealing with, you know. But I think Jim has the key to the whole thing. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't like the person who got something else and is now getting famous for it. So there'll always be people you can dig out. But swift boating was such a catastrophe and such a disaster politically and morally that I felt I wanted to speak up on that point alone. But just the idea of calling it the way he did, JD, was scandalous as far as I'm concerned. Walls is not a coward, and he certainly the fact that he may not have carried a rifle into combat or a rifle into combat that he wants to ban civilian use of doesn't make him a sterling of valor. Yeah.
Okay, Ken. All right. This is a topic of political attacks back and forth. It seems like the most popular one now. I mean, the history of this goes back, at least in America, to I guess the first election after Washington was anointed. So it's just, you know, your mother wears sneakers. You know, oh, you belong to a group that we don't like. You're overweight. You're underweight. Popular now is military, sex, finance. And I want to say racism, but it's really, in a positive sense, your relationship to minorities or people that are less fortunate than you. Those are the key things. And that's it. And you throw mud back and forth and back and forth. You know, you stand and you defend the guy you want elected for whatever reason that is. You would stand against the guy you don't want elected for whatever reason somebody has in their head. It's, you know, this is just rumors and banter back and forth. What's going to happen is somebody will get elected and somebody won't. And maybe they'll fight against it the way Trump did, or maybe they won't. The key thing is, and this isn't being discussed, how many countries count the ballots on paper ballots How many democracies count elections of presidents or prime ministers on paper ballots, not prime ministers, presidents, on paper ballots, and they get the count completed the night of the vote? Paper tally. And the United States is using computers, and is anybody here who has any background with computers? And you know, how many times you have to hear, Chase Bank lost 6 million accounts, and so forth and so on. Hacking going on. It happened the other night. The airlines go down. So anything, as soon as you get into a computer, totally exposed to corruption of various kinds. Paper ballots, without that, you're never going to have reliability. Paper ballots that you hold on to that can be recounted and checked and see if the signatures are correct and see what the totals were and so forth. The only time you can really rely on, integrity in the election cycle. And that's what's going on. And I don't care what name calling. Personally, I have to make this one comment. I don't care what name calling occurs, because if somebody's going to be president, they have to stand up to attacks, to people defaming them and criticizing them and accusing them of all kinds of things, honestly accusing them or falsely accusing them. They have to do a job. It is not an easy job. You don't want some namby-pamby, panty-waisted dilettante who's like, I love everybody. You know, all we have to do is get together. Why don't we stop fighting? You know, that's not going to handle it as a president. You need somebody with guts and integrity and a vision and the ability to recognize when they're wrong and the ability to correct it and go on and to function for the welfare of the entity that they're representing, in this case, the United States, and to some degree our allies. So, I mean, this is just banter back and forth. You know, oh, you didn't pay the dentist. You ate a hamburger that was, you're not a vegan. You know, you are a vegan. It's just crap. It doesn't matter. It's not important. I don't think it should be given any attention at all. That's my viewpoint. Thank you.
Well,
the next guy's got hands up.
Mike.
Well, first of all, Ken, I have to say that was great. That was the most impassioned reasoning I've ever heard. Brilliant reasoning for not voting for Trump or voting against him. But anyway, I think first of all, if you want to know what people did in the war, whether or not they were in combat, there's the old-fashioned way, and again, this is not necessarily accurate, but looking at their commendations, if they got any. In other words, did they win a medal? Did they get a ribbon? Whatever it is, what they got it for. But the point that facts, we've got to stick to the facts, is also part of the problem, because nobody knows what facts are anymore. It used to be that gut, in days of yore, gut instincts would count for something, and that people had a lot more common sense. But there's a dearth of common sense now. So people don't know what the facts is. It depends upon who they're listening to, what website they're going on, etc. And it's all a matter of perception. I personally don't believe that Waltz was the best choice. I would have certainly gone with Mark Kelly, and it has nothing against Waltz's capacities or anything, but as far as how people view him, what the public perception, the general public perception is going to be, especially in swing states or among independent voters. The fact is that those people are going to see, maybe they'll think that it swung to the left. Maybe they'll think it was an anti-Semitic move against Josh Shapiro. Whatever it is, whether you agree or not, these are the public perceptions that a lot of people are going to have. So strategically, that may have been maybe a mistake. But on the other hand, we should never underestimate Trump's ability to blow whatever advantage he might have. So, and the only other point I was going to put in, because I'm on limited time for this evening, the only other point is that one of the things I've become concerned about personally, and a lot of other people, I believe, is that who wins the votes, the actual vote in the election, may not be the deciding issue, or the totally deciding issue, because, as you know, there are 70, for lack of a better term, fifth columnists put in particular state legislatures who are determined to not certify the vote if it doesn't go their way. So the fact of the matter is, it's not just a matter of who's going to win the election, but will the election matter, and to what degree? That's it for me.
Okay, Jim.
Well, I heard an attorney yesterday talk about how they're going to initiate lawsuits around the country before the election to specifically deal with that issue. Now, it was interesting to hear what Ken said, because, you know, the issue of certifying the votes the same day, I mean, that's a talking point the Republicans make all the time. And it's ridiculous, because they themselves shot themselves in the foot, because they actually discouraged voting that was done by proxy ahead of time. So they realized that backfired, so they pulled away from that. But it's sort of interesting that that is an issue. Now, this guy, Walsh, you know, the media's gonna scrutinize this very carefully. And, you know, if I was the Democrats, I would immediately blow any kind of confusion out the door. Now, what really happened with him was his artillery battalion was called up after 9/11 and went to Europe. And they basically were assigned to defend air bases in Italy, Turkey, Belgium, and Britain. So he decided to go out, to leave. So the whole question is, some saying they're about ready to deploy to Iraq. Well, they're basically assigned to take over functions that regular Army units would normally do, and those guys were sent off to Iraq. So that's one problem with the bullshit that people are raising about him and trying to swift boat him. That the battalion was sent to Europe to backstop and replace active duty units that were being sent to Iraq. So that's a fact. All right. Then he decided to retire, and he had served for 25 years. All right. And so, you know, he got out and decided to run for Congress. And I think he ran for Congress in 2005. He ran for Congress in a Republican district.
Jim,
now,
can I interrupt 1 second?
Pardon me, what?
Can I interrupt once? He put in his retirement papers several months before his unit was alerted to deploy.
Interesting.
It was announced today.
Interesting. All right. So here is, now you have people who politically disagree with him. So there was a guy named Thomas Behrens, who was a command sergeant major. Now he reached the rank of command sergeant major, but he retired. Walsh retired as a master sergeant. All right. So he was a command sergeant major for a while. So maybe they're going to clarify that. But this guy, Behrens, who attacked him politically when he was running for Congress, made it clear to the Washington Post, and I'm quoting what he said. He said, it's very clear that their unit was not going to war. Now, maybe he decided to sugarcoat it by saying, okay, we're going to war. We're actually, you know, guarding bases from Al-Qaeda attacks, you know, because remember, everybody was super paranoid about the global war on terrorism. But anyway, so in Minnesota, he first was in the Nebraska National Guard. Then he transferred, when he moved to Minnesota in 96, to the Minnesota National Guard. But, you know, this is a political issue that's been in the state of Minnesota for a long time, about him and attacking him. And this guy Behrens, who they want to use for the swift boating thing, basically the guy puts an ad on Facebook calling Walsh as a traitor. Now, so we're going to get a lot of media attention in the print press in the next week or so on this.
quite distinctly. But guys who also served with him didn't agree with him politically, but they thought he was a good soldier. And that's something interesting about his personality, because here's this guy, an NCO. It's very funny to watch an NCO. We know NCOs, if they're really good, are big. They're basically performance artists. A good NCO, and here's this guy on stage who's now become a career politician. So it's a very interesting phenomena, and she obviously chose him. It was interesting. She didn't. I thought she was going to choose Kelly, frankly, but I was wrong. But this guy obviously has the ability to communicate, to motivate, and right now they got a little honeymoon going. So anyway, I'll send out to people this article about him in the Washington Post and all this, because the unit did in fact deploy to Iraq, but he was already out of the army at that point in time. He already retired, and it's an interesting question. I guess they put a stop. What's that thing when they
stop loss?
Stop loss, yeah. So the unit was away for 22 months when it finally deployed to Iraq. And remember, this was when they were having to come up with troops to rotate in and out of Iraq. They were sending artillery battalions there as infantry. And that was in the regular army and the National Guard. And remember, the entire reorganization of the Guard and Reserves after Vietnam was to precisely have this mobilization element to, quote, convey the popular will, the political will of the society, so that if you're going to go to war, you bring the National Guard and Reserves with you in the way the Army was reorganized after Vietnam. And so that's where you sort of see this issue of like the National Guard battalion going over there. Because again, this is very common in the past 30 years that the National Guard units will be part of these advisory missions all around the world. They're in Africa. They're deployed in Africa. Texas National, all the different National Guards from all around the country are activated to go do TDY in these kind of situations. So in any event, it's a very interesting situation. And I think, and then the other thing that they're angry about is he pushed for repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Oh.
And so that got them angry. And he also said, now this is quite interesting. Vance attends Yale Law School based on what Walsh in the Congress is doing to modify and expand the post-911 GI Bill. So that Vance actually was able to attend Yale Law School with their benefits because Walsh was advocating them in Congress. So it's sort of fun. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Well, he definitely should bring that up in the debate. You should thank me, basically, for your career. But,
exactly. It's quite amusing to watch the two of them go at each other.
I think the other thing, obviously, I think he did a 180 on the NRA. I think earlier, like a decade ago, he was like an A rating from the NRA. But, I think especially once he became governor and there were some school shootings, he supported regulations. So obviously that will, a certain part of the conservatives will hate him for that one. Or even maybe, again, given what's just happened, maybe take a shot at him.
It's 11 o'clock here in New York, and I know that makes it 8 o'clock on the West Coast, but it's enough. We've been here for about 2.5, 3 hours. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. We had a lot of attendance today. I can't even enumerate them all, but let me see. I have Mike Jankowicz from Queens and Jim Dingman from Manhattan or the Bronx. James Sagerton came in at the end, and he's in LA or somewhere on the West Coast. Joan DeLorenzo, I'm not sure where she's
in New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
York, okay. New York.
Theodore Cook, who's
I hope
upper West Side, and Alexander Stavropoulos, who's on the east side of Manhattan, and Jack D. LaPalma, who's in his own universe, as we all know, and Steve Kaiser, who's always on the West Coast. Okay,
I find
thank you all very much.
I find that very enjoyable, Ken. Thank you so much.
Okay, yes.
I'm always thinking physics, even if I'm not talking about it.
That's good. It's
and
good.
we should mention Ted
It's
Cook.
a universe. It's a universe I would be pleased to visit.
Yeah, Ted was in
Where is
Japan
it, Ted Cook?
once, too.
It was no. Ted is in. He's
Ted
up in.
Cook.
He's in upper
Ted Cook,
Manhattan
I said he
actually.
lives in the
And
upper side.
and we had Julian Spencer Williams from up in Montreal. He's the only non-American.
Okay. Well, is he non-American or just living up in North?
He's Canadian.
He's Canadian. Okay, they're very good people. Okay. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to see you next week. From New York. Have fun, learn more.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.